After years of being under our HOA's iron fist, they crossed a line finally by increasing my fees for having too many cars in my own driveway. What they didn't realize was that I'd been stealthily purchasing the neighborhood homes for years, and now it was time to demonstrate Karen, our power-hungry HOA president who truly owned this community. But would she admit defeat graciously when I unveiled my secret welcome to my channel? Please subscribe if you want more HOA and Karen stories. I didn't seek trouble with our HOA, I didn't. But when I discovered that bright orange notice stuck to my front door last Tuesday morning, I knew this was war. My hands were shaking as I read it. Immediate whole fee. Increase $500 monthly violation. Excessive vehicles on property 3 cars. That's what this was about. My work truck that I need for my construction business, my wife's SUV for her hospital shift, and the used Honda we bought for our daughter's 16th birthday last month. 3 perfectly normal cars in our own driveway. I watched through my kitchen window as Karen Mitchell, our HOA president, did her morning inspection walk with her little pink clipboard and measuring tape. She stopped at my driveway, pulled out her phone, and started taking pictures again. This was the 3rd time this week. "Honey, she's out there again," my wife Sarah called from the living room. "Perhaps we should just leave the Honda in the garage, no?" I said firmly, drinking my coffee. "We're not concealing our daughter's car like we're doing something illegal. The garage is packed with Sarah's medical equipment and my work gear." Exactly as we explained at the last H meeting. That meeting, I couldn't help but think about how Karen had sneered when I attempted to clarify our situation. "Rules are rules, Mr. Thompson," she'd told her, not even glancing up from her phone. "Perhaps if you can't pay for adequate garage storage, then this neighborhood isn't for you." Something Karen didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd been whispering up property in our complex for the last 5 years, using my real estate investment corporation. Each time a house was put on the market, I made sure to use different LLC names for the buys. It began as a savvy investment plan, but today it had become more. I went out to collect the mail, taking my time on purpose. Karen faked, looking over Mrs. Johnson's rose bushes, observing me out of the corner of her eye. Wretched Mrs. Johnson had received a fine last month for 2 vibrant roses, disrupting neighborhood color harmony. My phone rang a text from my lawyer. "Property closed, done. You now own 67% of the development?" I smiled, folding the phone away, as Karen Power walked towards me, her clipboard to her chest. "Mr. Thompson," she called out, her voice sickly sweet. "I hope you got our notice regarding the vehicle violation. I did, Karen, and I have some questions regarding the legal foundation of this fee hike." I kept my voice smooth and professional. She waved her hand away. "The board has complete jurisdiction to enact fees when necessary. Maybe if you'd go to more meetings, you'd see how things work." Her smile did not touch her eyes. Little did she realize that I'd been at every single meeting for the last 5 years via proxy representatives who owned the other homes. I'd sat back and chronicled every one of Karen's selective enforcements, every dubious fee, each abuse of authority. As she turned to leave her designer heels clicking on the sidewalk, she called over her shoulder, "Oh, and the board is having an emergency meeting tonight, 7 p.m. sharp. We'll be talking about further steps about problem properties." I watched her walk away, then took out my phone again to text my lawyer time to get out those documents we talked about Karen's making her move tonight. My daughter's car pulled into the driveway just then, and I watched Karen halt to snap additional photos. My blood boiled, but I remained cool. Tonight would make all the difference in this neighborhood. But first I had some phone calls to make. I entered and laid out the property maps on my desk. Each parcel meticulously highlighted and coded 5 years of careful planning, of gathering evidence, of documenting Karen's reign of HOA terror. Getting progressively worse tonight. She would realize her worst mistake wasn't simply targeting my family. It was underestimating precisely who she was handling. My phone rang. It was Mrs. Johnson from down the street, crying about another violation notice as I heard her tale. I caught a glimpse of the framed picture on my wall. My father, standing tall in front of his first house before an HOA's harassment, had caused him to sell at a loss. 20 years ago, Dad had instructed me to play the long game, to battle wise rather than angry. I glanced at my watch. 6 hours until the meeting. Karen wanted to play hardball over a few cars in a driveway. She had no idea what was coming. I walked into the community center's meeting room and immediately felt the tension. Every seat was filled with neighbors I'd known for years, sitting shoulder to shoulder. Whispering among themselves, Karen had really outdone herself this time. She'd even hired a professional photographer to take pictures of my driveway from various angles, creating 3 regular-sized vehicles appear to be some sort of illicit parking area. "Let's get started," Karen declared, banging her shiny pink gavel against the podium she'd scheduled this special meeting on a Tuesday night, fully aware that the majority of working families would have difficulty making it, but I had managed to ensure my presence, sitting silently in the back row, observing her stage her typical performance. As you can see from these professional photos, she started scrolling through her PowerPoint presentation. "Mr. Thompson's property has become a used car lot." A few gasps came from her loyal followers in the front row, the same ones whose Christmas decorations stayed up until March without any fines. I glanced around the room, noting how Mrs. Rodriguez, my elderly neighbor, rolled her eyes. She'd been fined last month for having her grandson's car in her driveway while he helped repair her roof. Mr. Chen, the high school science teacher, was furiously making notes. He'd been given a violation notice for having parked his vehicle slightly past his own driveway line during the recent snowstorm. Karen clicked to the next slide, indicating a zoomed-in picture of my daughter's car. This vehicle here had been in the same place for more than 48 hours. She did not say it was because my daughter had been home from college over the weekend. The meeting went on as Karen showed her evidence charts indicating supposed value property drops, complaints from anonymous neighbors, likely her friends, and even weather reports stating my cars were producing extra snowdrifts on the road. Besides, she went on pulling out a fat binder I've charted every time vehicles go in and out of Mr. Thompson's property. In the last 3 months, my eyebrows sprang up. She'd been keeping track of my family's comings and goings. Several neighbors shifted uneasily in their seats. That's when Sarah Jenkins, my next-door neighbor, got up. "Karen, isn't this excessive? They're just ordinary cars in an ordinary driveway." Karen's face clenched as she snapped, "You're out of order. You haven't been recognized by the chair." I watched as Karen's husband, Bob, began distributing copies of a new proposed bylaw, one that would restrict each household to 2 cars and mandate garage parking. Only the stupidity of it all nearly brought out a laugh. "Nearly will now vote on new vehicle restrictions and fee hike." Karen proclaimed, not even bothering to permit discussion. "All in favor." That was my signal. I slowly stood up, straightening my tie. "Point of order." "Madam President." Karen's eyes grew narrow as she glared at me over her reading glasses. "You're not recognized. Mr. Thompson, actually," I said, pulling out my own folder according to HOA bylaw section 73. "Any property owner may raise a point of order regarding voting procedures." The room grew quiet. I could view Karen's impeccably manicured nails clasping the podium harder before we vote. "I think it is significant to consider the HOA's current ownership structure of properties." I began heading in the direction of the front of the room, my heels clicking on the linoleum floor. "You see, in the last 5 years, Sunrise Properties has been homes within this development." Karen's face began to turn white as I drew out a big property map, and as CEO of Sunrise Properties, I considered it would be of interest to all to know who precisely owns the majority of this HOA. I stopped making eye contact with each board member. "But maybe we should talk about that after we go over these suspicious surveillance tactics you've been doing." The room broke out in whispers out of my peripheral vision. I could see phones being pulled out, neighbors taking pictures of every moment. Karen's hand shook, reaching for her water bottle, spilling her beloved gavel along the way. And that's when Bob rushed to the podium, whispering something in Karen's ear. Her eyes widened as she finally realized who she'd been messing with. All these years, the meeting room fell silent, as I stood up, my heart was pounding, but my voice remained steady. Karen's smug smile started to fade as I pulled out my leather briefcase. "Before we vote on these new fees," I said, "I have something worth sharing with the whole world." I opened my briefcase and took out a fat stack of property deeds, placing them one by one on the table. Each piece of paper represented another part of my secret plan coming to fruition. The room was filled with whispers as I put them in neat rows. "For the last 5 years, I've observed this HOA board overlooks serious maintenance problems while harassing good neighbors over minor issues. I've seen Karen here WR up Mrs. Johnson at 82 years of age for having a 1-in-2 tall flower pot in the meantime. Susan's bright purple fence, for some reason or another, never received a solitary warning." Karen's face reddened. "That's not true. I uphold all rules equally." She took her water bottle, but her hand shook so hard she spilled some on her designer blouse. I brought up photos on the meeting room's large screen. Here's Karen measuring my grass at 3 a.m. Last time Tuesday, the security camera tape was as clear as day. Several people gasped, and look, there she is, ignoring the Thompsons' infractions altogether, right after they hired her son's landscaping company. More whispers filled the room. I could see people beginning to nod, remembering their own confrontations with Karen's selective enforcement. But the most interesting thing I found out, I said, grabbing the stack of deeds, is that through my company Sunrise Properties, I now own 67% of the houses in this acquisition. I stopped as the significance settled in. That makes me the majority holder of the HOA itself. Karen leapt to her feet, knocking over her chair. You can't do that. It's not permitted. Her voice had gone squeaky with fear. I smiled serenely. Indeed I can. I've had 3 various law firms go over everything. It's legally sound. I produced another folder. I also have signed complaints from 32 residents regarding harassment, selective enforcement, and suspicious fees. The room erupted. Mrs. Johnson stood up, her voice shaking with emotion. Last winter, they fined me $200 for not shoveling my walkway fast enough. I was in the hospital with pneumonia. Others joined in, sharing their stories. Karen tried to restore order, banging her gavel, but nobody was listening to her anymore. I moved to dissolve the current board. I announced we'll hold new elections with term limits and clear rules about conflict of interest. No longer 3 a.m., grass measuring, no longer selective enforcement. Bob Chen of 2 doors down raised his hand. I second that motion. Soon hands were rising all over the place around the room. Karen reached for her designer bag and began toward the door. This meeting is adjourned, she yelled. You'll be hearing from my lawyer, actually, I said, still calm. According to HOA bylaws, Section 7.3, you need a majority vote to adjourn, and I don't think you have that anymore. I gestured at the deeds spread out across the table. We're just beginning. She stilled her hand on the doorknob with a growing awareness that her authority was sliding away. 20 years of governing the neighborhood with an iron fist were nearing an end. Now, I said, opening another folder, let's discuss those strange pool renovation charges from this past summer, the ones where $50,000 vanished but the pool never was repaired. I have some enlightening bank statements to share. Karen leaned against the wall, her face white. She hadn't seen yet, but a local news van had just arrived in the parking lot. I'd invited them to report on our community reorganization meeting. The next few hours would transform our neighborhood forever, but first we had decades of Karen's secrets to reveal, and I had every single receipt. My meticulous planning was finally going to pay off, and the best was yet to come. I walked into my lawyer's office on Monday morning to find 20 angry voicemails from Karen. She'd found out my company's property records over the weekend and was threatening to sue me for secretly attempting to take over the neighborhood. I couldn't help but smile. She'd finally shown her true colors. But Karen wasn't just angry. She was scared. That evening, she went door-to-door, spreading rumors that I was going to convert our peaceful suburb into a parking lot for my car collection. Some neighbor actually believed her, particularly after she displayed them fake documents indicating I had relationships with a suspicious development firm. I knew I needed to act quickly. My security cameras caught Karen trespassing onto my property at midnight, taking close-up shots of my car's license plates. The following day, she sued, alleging I'd violated HOA rules by purchasing properties through my company. She even attempted to obtain an emergency court order to freeze my voting rights within the HOA. That's when my months of meticulous planning were rewarded. My lawyer unveiled our ace in the hole, a record of each HOA meeting for the last 5 years. We had videos of Karen giving her friends passes on their infractions while stringently finding others. We had copies of checks indicating she'd used HOA funds to redo her own backyard. Best of all, we had emails where she bragged about utilizing her authority to keep unwanted elements out of the community. The judge's eyes widened with every bit of evidence. Karen's face blushed when we presented time-stamped video of her measuring my grass with a ruler at 3 a.m., taking pictures of my teenage daughter's car and leaving threatening messages on my neighbor doors. Her lawyer began sweating when we showed evidence that she altered HOA records to conceal her friends' unpaid dues. But the biggest shock came when 3 former board members stepped forward. They testified about how Karen had bullied them into approving unfair rules, admitted to targeting specific homeowners she didn't like, and even bragged about using HOA fines to fund her yearly trips to Hawaii. The courtroom got really quiet when we showed Karen's social media posts mocking elderly residents who couldn't pay their HOA fees. There, she was posting poolside photos from Maui with the caption, "Thanks to all my rule-breaking neighbors for funding this vacation, keep those violations coming." Karen attempted to defend herself, stating she was merely doing her job, but then we produced the tape from last month's HOA meeting, where she'd yelled at Mrs. Johnson, our 75-year-old neighbor, for having a bird feeder that was 2 inches too low. That's when Karen finally lost it. She stood up, jumping from her seat, pointing at me. "He's trying to ruin our perfect neighborhood," she yelled. "Do you know what type of people will live here if we don't have strict regulations? He likely wants to make this into one of those communities where individuals are able to park wherever they wish. The judge had heard enough. He not only threw out Karen's lawsuit, but he ordered a full audit of the HOA's finances as we exited the courthouse. My phone began buzzing with texts from neighbors. They'd all been sent a mass email from Karen declaring her immediate resignation from the board, accusing her of being pushed out by big money interests. I saw her storm to her car, already typing away furiously on her phone. I knew this wasn't over. Karen still had devoted followers in the neighborhood, and she wasn't the kind to admit defeat easily, but for now I had what I needed, evidence that our HOA president had been abusing her power for years, and the legal right to make actual changes. The morning of the last court hearing began with a surprise. Karen had dispatched a battalion of news van to my house. She believed public pressure would encourage me to back down, but she'd just provided me with the perfect platform. I smoothed my tie, picked up my documents, and strode right up to the reporters with a smile. "Good morning, everyone. I'm James Thompson, and I'd like to show you something interesting about our HOA's financial records." I produced the color-coded spreadsheets. My accountant had made displaying years of suspicious fees that always found their way into projects that benefited Karen's closest friends. The reporter's eyes widened as I described how Karen had charged single parents more violation fees than her golf friends. One reporter gasped when I produced security footage of Karen measuring my grass at 3 a.m., while her own yard broke every rule in the book. Inside the courthouse, Karen sat with her pricey attorney dressed in her signature fake pearl necklace and self-satisfied smile. That smile disappeared when our attorney began producing evidence. We produced pictures of Karen's own home, violating rules, her bright purple mailbox, her neglected garden, and her son's 4 cars parked on the street. The judge leaned forward when we produced Karen's secret Facebook group, where she boasted about targeting specific families. Let's see how long the Thompsons last. With these new charges she'd penned, maybe they'll finally get up and sell to someone more appropriate. Karen stood up to protest but froze solid when we played the tape from last week's pool party. Her voice came ringing clear through the courtroom. "Of course I invent infractions. How else can we maintain control of who lives here?" The judge's gavel came down hard. Not only was Karen taken off the HOA board, but she had to refund every unfair fee she'd charged. The look on her face when she learned the total $1,478.92 was better than any revenge I could have concocted. I employed my majority ownership to form a new HOA board. With a twist, we appointed 5 residents from various areas of the neighborhood, including Mrs. Rodriguez, whom Karen had attempted to locate for cooking ethnic cuisine, and Mr. Chen, whose stunning garden Karen described too exotic. The changes came quickly. Children could now play basketball in their driveways. Gardens might have vegetable gardens, flowers, and yes, the families might be able to park more than 2 cars, providing they would fit in their own space 3 weeks down the line. I looked out of my window as Karen's moving truck arrived. She'd sent one last letter to everyone saying she was relocating to an improved neighborhood with higher standards. No one missed the way her new HOA's parking ticket remained glued to her windshield as she drove off. My daughter pulled her car into our driveway that night, right alongside my work truck and my wife's SUV. I placed a little sign we'd all agreed upon, "Welcome to Thompson Hills," where good neighbors make good neighborhoods. The following morning, I received an unexpected phone call. A TV producer had watched the news footage and wanted to film a documentary on how we'd changed our HOA as I gazed out at children playing spontaneously in their backyards and neighbors talking over fence lines. I smiled, recalling Karen observing it from her new home with its one-car garage policy. The highlight: our property values increased 15% in the first month since Karen departed. Turns out people truly do like living in a community where they're respected rather than ruled by fear. Some of Karen's former friends dropped by to apologize, conceding they'd just been afraid of becoming her next target. We still have an HOA, but now it guards the neighborhood rather than patrolling it. Every month we utilize the fees on things that really count: upgrading the playground, repairing the pool, assisting elderly homeowners with keeping up their homes. We even created a community garden in the area where Karen used to stage her yard vial photos. As I put away the final of the court papers, my phone rings with a text message. It's from Karen's new neighborhood watch group. They're seeking opinions on how to handle their own power. Hungry HOA president. I sit back in my chair reflecting on how at times the best revenge is not revenge at all. It's teaching others how to stand up for themselves.